Welcome to Human Potential at Work, the show where we explore social impact, inclusion, and empowerment of everyone, including persons with disabilities. Get ready to be inspired, hear success stories, and learn tips and principles for bringing out the best in everyone. Hello, and welcome to the program. This is Doug Foresta, and of course with me is Deborah Rue, the CEO of Rue Global Impact. And we're going to be talking today about, what I really want to talk about is this idea of virtual work, accessibility, technology. What I think is so interesting is how we're having this new conversation. And, Deborah, first of all, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, what I wanted to say, I was thinking about is, and the reason I wanted to have you on to talk about this is because, when I first met you, you were in the process of transitioning, but you had run a company, and this was over 10 years ago, that
Right.
You were running a company that was talking about technology and accessibility. Can you say a little bit about, give people a little bit of history about your own experience in the technology sector?
Well, it's funny. I learned to be a technologist from my father, and my father was a technologist before we had that term. And he worked for AT&T, and he took care of this gigantic mainframe that took up like 3 blocks in Jacksonville, Florida.
Oh
And I
gosh.
imagine my iPhone has much more computing power than
yes,
that
most likely.
gigantic. Yeah. So, but my father always loved technology, and he was definitely what we've become to call the bleeding edge, because my father would jump into the technology really when it hadn't even been well vetted. He was one of the ones that vetted it. And so he taught me just such a love for technology. And then when my oldest daughter was born with Down syndrome, and I really started thinking, how do I help her have her best life? Which, we as parents are always thinking, how do we have, how do we help our children have their best lives? I knew that technology was going to be a very important part of it, but I didn't at the time realize the accessibility issues tied, the digital divide, the digital inclusion issues, all of these different things. So when my daughter reached middle school and the experts brought us in to talk about, her being included in the workforce, and I started hearing what millions before me have heard: she's not going to add any value to the workforce, just keep her at home. She, the same thing I heard when she was a little baby. Well, some people institutionalize babies with Down syndrome, and I thought, you're going to have to bring in some awful strong people to take my baby away from me. You really need to back away from me, because I'm not going to talk to you. I actually left the room with her when I got those kind of comments, because there's nothing wrong with my baby, So it was sort of that same thing. Now she can't add any value to the workforce. And I thought, I disagree with you. She actually could add great value to the workforce. So I sort of woke up, like many people do, to what people with disabilities have to deal with entering the workforce. And then once again, part of the barriers of really entering and being really active in the workforce, you have to have accessible technology. You have to have accessible, you have to be accommodated in some cases. You have to, your assistive technology have to work. There's a lot of different moving parts and nuances to this. And so I was doing that back in 2001. Most of my team, over 80% of my team, 80 to 85% of my team, were technologists with disabilities. And we were working with corporations and organizations, helping them make sure they were fully accessible to their employees, to their vendors, to their customers. And of course, fast forward to this COVID-19 crisis, where everybody goes home. At one point, 97% of the world was home.
Yeah.
And we see how important accessibility is for everybody, not just for people with disabilities.
That's exactly right. And Deborah, I don't know the answer to this. So when you were running that company, did you have a physical location? Did most people work virtually? What did that look like?
Well, it was interesting because I started the company in 2001, and I'll tell you, it's the good news. I built it to a multi-million-dollar business. We had, amazing clients, but at the same time, we're like most small businesses, struggling with cash flow, making mistakes the whole time, But I thought that I needed to have a physical office. And so most of my employees teleworked. And it was very important. It's very important, now, but it also was very important then because we weren't seeing a lot of people with disabilities being hired as technologists even at that time. And
Hmm.
also some of my team were actually working from nursing homes, sometimes rehab facilities, depending upon, the cycle that they were in. Maybe they were working from home, but they needed, and still do, some of these same team members now work for my company, Rue Global Impact, but they needed around the clock care because they have what society considers very severe disabilities, but they're also brilliant, amazing, talented
Hmm.
employees. But I thought I needed it, Doug. And so what I did was I went and I got an office that was really bigger than I needed. And it almost killed us because it was such an
Yeah.
expensive work. It was such an expensive, um,
Well,
you
the
know,
overhead of that, right? I mean,
yeah, the
yeah.
overhead, right. It was intense, and it was, and then what happened was my employees weren't really even using it because they found that they were more productive and they preferred to work from home, like we're
And
all
what year, I
doing
was gonna
now.
say, and what year are we talking right now, Deborah?
We're talking about probably, I had an office probably from 2000, and I'm trying to think of it because at first I worked out of my home because we couldn't afford an office. But
Sure.
then as we became more prosperous, probably from 2003 to 2011, when we merged with another company. But it was very expensive. And so one thing, and it was, I'll tell you, for example, was $1,100 for the office space, but then I had to pay extra for Wi-Fi, and then there are all these expenses. You have electricity, you have phone bills, you had all this, and it wound up being, it would cost me almost $2,500 a month. And
Right. It's like a mortgage.
for a
I mean, you're
place,
paying another mortgage.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah,
But I really want people to hear that, because the reason that I wanted to have this conversation with you is because you were having, I mean, these are things now that companies are now dealing with, small businesses are dealing with right now, right? That you had been dealing with, 15, 20 years ago.
yeah,
And the other thing I think that's really interesting, and why I just want to make sure that, your heart and soul is in serving the community of persons with disabilities. But I
yes.
really want people to hear that this is not an episode about disability. This is
Mm-mm.
an episode about technology, and it is an episode about our willingness to innovate and to realize that everyone adds value. One of the things I sort of remember a little bit of some of the kinds of technologies that you had. Would it be fair to say that many of those technologies today have actually been are no longer needed as standalones,
Right.
assistive devices, because they've been incorporated
Mhm.
into our everyday technologies, like this one, right?
Right, right. And also, I want to say this is also about productivity
Yeah, that's
because
great.
if we're in business or you have nonprofit or whatever, you have to do, we have to make money to pay our
Mhm.
bills and pay our staff and blah blah blah. We all know this. And so there's nothing wrong with making money, but I believe that you've got to be doing social good as well. And I also think that during this time of great crisis, that's one thing people are, I believe, that's we're going to evolve as human beings and understand that there is value certainly in making money, but it should be tied to social good. I'm hopeful that that's going to happen, but it is about, from the employer's perspective, we need our employees to be productive. We need our
Right,
employees to be happy and to have work-life
right.
balance. We need our employees to have the technology they need, but it is interesting how the technologies has changed because since 2001, a lot of the assistive technology that my team was using, screen readers,
Yeah,
magnifiers, text to speech, speech to text.
yeah.
There's so many different things.
Yeah,
Eye
yeah.
glaze,
Right, right. I mean, you talk about, speech to text. I mean,
Right, right. And so much of this technology and the really cool, amazing technology we use was created for and by people with disabilities. And now
right,
the entire societies benefit from them.
right.
But I will say, Doug, yes, a lot of these mainstream technologies have become much more robust, much more accessible. but they still cannot completely replace assistive technology. And
Good to know.
sometimes I have people saying that, and they'll say, oh, my website's so accessible, you don't even need your screen reader. Well, actually, I do need my screen reader if I'm a screen reader user, because I have to use my screen reader to get to your website. So I have to sign on to my computer. I have to navigate to the internet,
Right.
have to navigate to your website. So I think it's great if your website's fully accessible. And I think, I don't know if it's, why would you not want all customers, all of your
Right.
employees to access the internet, your technology, I should say. But at the same time, there are still, assistive technologies that have not been replaced by mainstream, and that we don't want to try to replace, because people should get to decide how they work and how they interact with technology. And if you will allow people to tell you what they need, sometimes they don't know what they need, but a lot of times people already have an idea of what they need to be productive. And so
Yeah.
mainstream has helped a lot. Mainstream also has helped the assistive technologies like screen readers that we use work much more efficiently. I remember one time years ago, the screen reader would try to pronounce one of my clients as "sa," which was actually SSA. So it at the time didn't realize it shouldn't try to pronounce that acronym. It should, yeah. And so the assistive technology tool makers they also have been really good about making their tools accessible. I remember it in the early 2000s, assistive technology wasn't being made accessible, which
Right.
is amazing. So
Okay. I know, yeah. I like trying to process that. So
yeah.
one of the takeaways there then that I would think about is, for companies who are going virtual, who say, well, we have all this top of the line technology, it'll be good enough for everyone. You do need to actually look at, who your staff are, what your needs are, and allow people to actually tell you what their needs are. And it may very well be that people still need assistive technology on top of all this wonderful technology that we have.
Correct. There's so many interesting and frightening and terrifying things happening during the COVID-19 crisis. But one thing that we're seeing is that more people are self-identifying as needing accommodations. We call them
Right.
accommodations in the United States. The UK calls them adaptions, but it's the same thing. And employees are starting to realize, oh no, I need that. And it's also interesting that, some assistive technology or accessible technology that helps a person with a disability be more productive actually adds great value to everybody else too. And so if the bottom line is we want our employees to be productive, we want them to be able to do their job, we want them to be innovative and creative, we need to make sure they have the tools and the accommodations they need to be accessible. And most accommodations, Doug, are not very expensive. I
Right.
mean, some of the screen readers are, more expensive because of the robustness of the tools, but a lot of the accommodations that you would make for an employee with a disability or an employee that's aged into a disability, there's no cost at all to them.
Well,
And
and I
so,
just want to
yeah,
say something about accommodations that just gets under my skin. So think about this. When we think about what is an accommodation, right? Who needs accommodations? I mean, we all need accommodations, I mean, otherwise we'd be all running naked through the forest, right? I mean, without any accommodations in society, without any technologies, I mean, our whole society is an accommodation. The question is, who is it accommodating? And so one of the things I just want to point out is I think that, tell me what you think, but I think as employees see that, hey, within a week, you said we couldn't work from home, you said we couldn't telework, you said there was no flexibility and there was no room for discussion, but all of a sudden in a week, when it was this or go out of business,
right.
all of a sudden it happened. We all got laptops, we all got internet boosters, and you made sure it happened because you needed us to continue working. Do you think do you see that? I mean, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but just from your own experience, like, do you think that may maybe it'll increase what I'm thinking is maybe it'll increase the expectation on the part of employees of what's possible for employers if they have the will to do it?
No, I think you're right. And by the way, I understand the dynamics of where we are right now. I understand that we're at, in the United States, 20% unemployment. I understand that 36 plus million Americans are out of a job. So it's time of crisis.
Yeah.
But we won't always be in that time of crisis. Companies will start finding their equilibrium. Companies are going to go out of business.
Yeah.
It's going to be it's tough. We know it's tough right now. But if you want to be an employer of choice, if you want your employees to be productive, if you want your employees to stay with you, you do need to accommodate your employees. And I remember one time I was being interviewed on television, and the reporter asked me questions about accommodations, and I knew where she wanted me to go, but I very deliberately would not go there at first, because she was like, well, how do you accommodate your employees, since so many of your employees are technologists with disabilities? And I said, well, I try to accommodate all of my employees, because by accommodating my employees, not only do I show them that I care about them and I help them be more productive, but I also keep them, and retention is very important to me.
Yeah.
I don't want to lose my talented employees.
That's right.
Your best employees are always at risk of being poached by other people. And so I accommodate my employees. For example, I had, and I was saying this on air, so I said I had one of my employees that did not have a disability that wanted to be able to coach his daughter's soccer team on Tuesdays at 3:00. Well,
Yeah.
of course I accommodated this gentleman. He does everything for me. He's an amazing worker. And then there was another employee that did not have a disability that hurt themselves. And at the time, this is, we don't have to do this anymore, but they needed a one-handed keyboard because they broke their shoulder. They could not use their shoulder or their arm or their hand for over 9 months. And so he was using a one-handed keyboard. So I accommodated him because he had a temporary disability. But then, of course, I had employees that needed screen readers, that needed magnifiers, that need bigger, monitors so they could see. And so you accommodate your employees because you want them to be more productive. And it's important to speak about this from the language of business and from employers. And so people will say, yeah, but you should be accommodating us because, yeah, I get it. But at the bottom line, you've got to speak the employer language. We need our employees to be productive and innovative and creative.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, it's just giving people the tools with which they need to work. I mean, you wouldn't, you give a mechanic a car and he goes, hey, can I get a lift so I can look under it? You go, listen, I'm going to need you to lift that car. We don't offer the accommodation of a lift at this garage, right? You're like, well, then I can't do the work that you need me to do. Like, just give me the tools. I'll do a great job, but you just got to give me the tools. That's true for all of us. Again,
I agree.
Deborah, so I want to say, you've been obviously running virtual teams and managing people virtually and leading people virtually for a long time. And, you and I like to joke too. I mean, it's mind-boggling to me, and COVID is not helping because this is the year we're going to get together. But you and I have never actually met in person, which is still boggles my mind, because
it's amazing because we're such close friends.
You are way closer to me than my neighbor.
Right.
And my neighbor, like, I could reach out and touch my neighbor, right?
Right. It's amazing.
Say a little bit about, I know one of the things that businesses are looking at is they're struggling with how to lead when people aren't physically all together in the building. Say a little bit about, what advice would you have for leaders about how to do that?
Well, I've been in business a long time. I was in the banking industry for 25 years before I became an entrepreneur. And I'm certainly a woman of a certain age, but it's fascinating to me because the way you lead a virtual team is the way you really should have been leading a team that was all together. You should not decide that a person is productive because you can see them working and doing something on their computer. If people don't want to work, there's so many ways they can not work. I remember in my younger years, really before we had, we didn't have PCs at the time. We did have dumb terminals, and that's what we called them, dumb terminals tied to mainframes. But I would walk around and I would see somebody looking, they looked like they were looking at a report, and they actually had a book inside of it. And I'm like, what are you doing? Or then we progressed, and I would see people playing solitaire. So if people want to goof off, and sometimes, by the way, when you see people doing that, it's actually a different way of thinking. I'm not saying that people should be playing all day, but we also can't always assume because somebody's doing something different that they might be actually using a different part of their brain or using their brain differently to solve a problem. So, but we have to have, it's very important as leaders that our employees, our team members know what is expected of them. And then we have to have the right kind of measurements, KPIs, key performance indicators, processes, so that we know whether or not they're doing their job. So what I always say to my team is, I'm not going to see whether you're on from 9 to 5 or 8 to 5 or whatever, but I do need this project completed in this way by this time and this date. And if you can't complete the project or whatever, then you need to be communicating with me. So I use tools like we use Monday.com, and we talk a lot. We really like Google Chat. We use Google Chat internally a lot because it provides automatic captions. So we have captioning, and then we found this great little tool that allows us even to capture those captions later if we needed them. And so we treat, I know this is so odd, but we treat our employees like they're adults and they know what their jobs are. But at the same time, as leaders, you need to be paying attention to your employees, because right now during this crisis, I'm starting to notice, I'm struggling myself. I'm struggling myself with the losses, with the scary things, with, the worries about my team and my family and my friends. And it just is going on and on and on and on, right? So I, first of all, have started taking better care of myself so I can be a better leader and a better team member, but I'm also paying attention to my team members in a different way, because people are at risk right now. They're at great risk. We expect a lot of people are going to have post-traumatic stress disorder coming out of this. We're already seeing people do things that seem very illogical. The woman in Central Park that just lost it. You're seeing a lot of mental health issues, and it's not that people are broken. And one thing that we've got to do a much better job about is understanding that we do have brains and we do have feelings and thoughts. It's okay to call somebody and say, oh my gosh, I broke my leg. Oh, that's terrible, Deborah. Okay, will you stay home and you lift your, but if I call and say, oh my God, I'm losing my mind. I think I'm depressed.
People will be like, well, maybe you don't need to work here anymore. Right.
Well, and let me note that in your file,
I want to pull something out just real quick, because I just want to make sure I don't lose it, and I'll definitely lose it. It'll fall right out of my brain. You talked about how, like, the micromanaging kind of style of leadership, right? And it's interesting. I just want to kind of, I think on the one hand, virtual work is showing us that we have to manage outcomes versus exactly. I mean, it's like, I always think about, like you said, I used to work in a place one time, and there was this guy, and he was the first one in, the last one out, and he was always at his desk, but he was always at his desk not doing anything, right? So, I mean, so great. He was always at his desk. I mean, I don't know if he had a terrible home life or what. He didn't want to be at home. He liked being at his desk, but that doesn't make you a good employee or productive or anything. It's interesting because what I'm seeing, and I think maybe a challenge for some leaders, is I do know that there are technologies that can, like, count keystrokes, or even like looking through webcams at employees, like activating their webcam to see, like, so now it could be even more kind of big brother, right? So I think some organizations are going more towards, okay, we're going to treat people like adults, and then I've seen some where they're like, okay, now we can even more, hook up your your blood pressure cuff to the computer so we can monitor your heart rate during the day. So I'm just curious about your thoughts about that. Like, do you think that virtual work, maybe there's a downside to it as well, that it could be used for even greater micromanagement?
Well, I think that there can be real downsides to working from home, because one of the greatest things I see, and I always tell my team members that when they start and they've never teleworked before, you very quickly can lose your work-life balance.
Yeah.
And so you have to think differently, and it can be very stressful. It's not the panacea that people think, oh, I'm going to have so much time. You wind up, and the employers, by the way, have found this too. The employers have found that people are actually working more and being more productive, even if they have, like you, Doug, little babies. You were trying
Sure.
to do this for months. You and
Yes.
your wife working
Yeah.
full-time at home
Yeah. We didn't even
with
talk
two
about that.
little
The lack of childcare. Exactly.
yeah, two little babies. And so, but if an employer is doing something like that in the first place, I would not work for an employer like that. You treat me like that, I'm out of there. So your good
Yeah.
employees, your talents, they're not going to stay. And so
Yeah.
then you might think, oh, it's okay. I'm going to do this right now because everybody's so freaked out because so many people have lost their jobs. And I remember working for a company, I won't say who, when I was younger, much younger, and it was a great job and it had great benefits, but I felt very devalued. They were constantly telling us, there's 1,000 people standing right outside that want your job. And they just made me feel that I didn't add any value, and they took away my individuality from me.
Mm,
And so as soon as I could, I quit and I left. So
yeah.
if employers are acting like that, that means you don't trust your employees, and it means you're a bad employer as well. Because so right now people will put up with it, but they're not going to put up with it long term. And we're going to find our equilibrium with all this. And so if you want to be an employer of choice, you need to make sure that you are supporting your employees. You are, the United States government in some circumstances consider telework an accommodation.
Mm,
Well, now we're all teleworking. And once again, more
yeah.
people are self-identifying, not because you're going to think less of me because I'm an individual with a disability, which I am. I actually have ADHD, and that comes with depression and anxiety, which is very difficult at any time, but certainly during this crisis, even harder to manage. And so,
Mhm.
but with that, you get creativeness and you get innovation and you get
Exactly.
all
That's
these
what
other
makes you a great
benefits.
entrepreneur. Absolutely.
Right. So if you were treating your employees like that, then you are not being a good employer. And maybe you don't think you need to be a good employer, but your employees will leave. Your best employees will leave. And I'll also say, Doug, your employees also know, like you mentioned that gentleman that never worked, and everybody knew it. And so one thing that we have to remember as leaders, the employees know who's working and who isn't
Right.
working, and they know if you're not doing your job and not holding people accountable.
Yeah.
And so we do have some old ways of doing things. It's like my way or the highway.
Yeah.
You turn on my camera. If I catch you turning on my camera, as
Well, that's
soon
just
as I
such an
can,
invasion. Right. That's
yeah,
such an
as soon as I
invasion of
can, I'm
privacy.
out of there. I don't trust you.
Yeah.
And we have employees actually picketing against their employers and getting
Yeah.
online. So the good news is employees know that we do have voices
Yeah.
as well. We can go on social media. You don't control your
Yeah.
brand anymore. So I hope that we can all evolve and employers can evolve and not treat people that way. But I'm seeing some really bad things people are doing. Employers
So
are
yeah,
doing some really bad
the
things.
takeaway there is don't, use this time to really change your leadership style,
Yes.
not just use the technology, but I think that's a great takeaway. The other thing, as you were saying that I was thinking about, as you said, now we're accommodating everyone, which again
Mhm.
goes back to my thing about, you know, I again, society is an accommodation. It's just, again, who are we accommodating, right? It's
Right.
power, and we know what that hierarchy is of who gets accommodated first. But what's interesting is, do you think that with virtual job interviews and now most people working from home, do you think that this might move the needle on who, not only how people are working, but who is working? Because it's going to be harder for employers to say, well, you have to walk up the stairs. Or there was a story that I read that was really interesting. It was this woman who was one of the first executives at I think it was NBC, one of the first TV executives, and she made her way to the penthouse. Well, they only had men's bathrooms, because they never had a woman there. They didn't have a bathroom for her. So, now, I mean, use your own bathroom, right? So do you think that it might start to move the needle on who gets hired?
And what I fear is going to happen is we're going to lose traction first.
Mm,
And so I remember during the 2008, 2009 financial crisis,
yeah.
I went and spoke in Hawaii, which was a fun gig, but I was talking to a government official there, and we was talking about including people with disabilities in the workforce. And he said, "Boy, that must be a real hard sell." I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, the normal people." I
Mm.
didn't jump across the table and smack him because
I
that would
was
have been
gonna say
inappropriate, but because what?
the
But
normal people.
yeah, but he was saying, well, they don't have jobs, so why would you expect us to hire people with disabilities? And
Wow.
so I said, well, this is not only about hiring, this is about retaining your top talent. And today, in most large corporations, Doug, they have 5 generations working for them. And there are 70 million Americans that are over the age of 56 now. And many,
Yeah.
people are aging into disabilities. And I'm not saying that in a negative way, it's just happening. And so it doesn't mean we still can't add value. It doesn't mean that we're still not innovative and productive, but we have these fragile bodies. And so I worry that one thing that might happen is that this might be a reason for people that weren't really taking inclusion very seriously anyway. This would just be another reason to continue to hire somebody that looks exactly like you instead of
Yeah.
thinking about it from a creative, productive diversity thing. But I think in the long run, this is going to change. I really
Mm.
do, because I know more and more really good employers that actively want to hire people with disabilities and other diversity
Yeah.
groups. And some of it is the benefits that we're getting from the intersectionality of diversities as well. So, we're finding that if everybody on the team looks alike, thinks alike, has the same religion, they're all heterosexual, they're all white, you just need the different experiences. We bring different experiences to the table. People with disabilities are really good problem solvers because
They have to be.
society disables us.
That's right. They
You
have to
have
be.
no choice but to be a problem solver. So I think innovation, productivity, and creativeness in the long run will win. But I just fear that in the short run, a lot of people with disabilities, a lot of people over a certain age, those people are going to start losing their jobs. I think we're going to lose some diversity in this, but in the long run, I think it's going to balance itself out.
Yeah, I always say I always say that like you can't unknow something. So, once you learn, once you know something, you can't not know it. And once we know that we can work successfully, that many, many jobs can be done successfully from, virtual work, it's hard to unknow that. So I agree with you. I think, right now the unemployment rate is so high. So then, and of course, the unemployment rate has been this higher for people with disabilities for the past umpteen years,
Right.
right? But once we get past that, the economy starts to move again. Yeah, it's really hard to unknow that we can work virtually, and like you said, that people could be even more productive than they were coming in the office. Because by the way, I had to spend 2 hours or 3 hours commuting, right? Well, that's wasted time that I could have been finishing something.
Right. And that's what employers are finding. And I think it's very interesting. We've already seen some employers step up. For example, Twitter announced
Yeah,
from now on, everybody gets to telework. So they saw the value. And by the way, Twitter is a social media company. Why are you not teleworking? I mean, there's times to get together with teams, but the reality is, we can get together. I mean, you and I are a perfect example. We've never met in person, and yet we've been very productive for
that's
over
right. We've
10
done many,
years.
many things together. I
Yeah.
know.
So we know this now, and then you have, and then Google announced that engineers all of the Google engineers are going to work from home through the end of the year. Now, I don't know why they selected engineers over others. I'm sure they have some good business reason, but you're starting to see more and more companies. And then of course the employees are seeing this.
Yeah.
And I think we need, in some ways we already have this, but employers need to understand that employees need work-life balance. And before that sounds like, oh, so nice to have. No, we need that for
Right.
mental health,
Right.
so that once again, we can be productive for you. We need to have diverse teams working together because we come from different backgrounds and we
Yeah.
solve problems in different ways to be creative. So I think that in the long run, you're going to have a lot of companies understand the value of telework. And then you say, okay, and I have an answer for this, Doug. Okay, well, what about all those office buildings? I know. Why don't we turn them into affordable housing? Why don't we help people that
Right.
are having to work 3 jobs to take care of their children? Why don't we help people that are homeless? Why don't we help society? You don't need everybody on those roads. You're damaging our planet doing this. The way we're behaving before COVID-19 was actually damaging our planet. So
Yes.
how about if you have more productive employees that have better work-life balance, more diversity and inclusion, so everybody can be productive and creative and innovative, and allow people to work from home so that they can be, they can bring their best self to work.
And, I just had a thought as you said that, and I say this as a parent of 3, is that, one thing I would suggest for employers as the economy picks up and you want to get top talent, is another accommodation that would be really helpful for people is childcare. If you could offer a childcare benefit, whether that's a stipend for people to then maybe get in-home help for, because especially as we work from home, right? And if children aren't in school, that's going to be an issue for some time. So I just thought, accommodation can be so many things, but, I think we're going to see more parents stepping up and saying, hey, wait a minute, you want me to work? Little Johnny's still here too. I need some help.
I agree. And I think, as we move away from brick and mortar, and companies had already started doing that. I mean, we're
Yes.
globalized. And so we have employees. Yeah, I know in my small firm, I have employees. I have an employee that's in the Philippines who happens to be brilliant and amazing and blind. I have a gentleman that works for me from Syria, and he is so talented. I have another gentleman that works for me for Costa Rica. And then a lot of my employees work in different states all over the United States. But if you want the best talent and I think sometimes we've sort of forgotten what it means to work. Why are we working? Well, we're working to add value to society, to pay our bills. But if we don't have to all get on the roads and go to your office and pretend like we're working or, work, what could we do with that money? How could we do it in a way that we could actually improve people's lives? Because there's a lot of people that have just been, dealing with this and doing what we've been told, but just slowly dying inside. And so some people have had an easier time sheltering in place than others. It's been easier for me, even though I'm caring for my husband with dementia, than, for example, it's been with you, because I don't know, these little toddlers are so funny. They want to put everything in their mouth. You have to watch them all the time. So I think we're learning so much about ourselves as human beings, ourselves as employers, as leaders and employees, that I know the innovative companies, they're looking at this and saying, how can we do this better to support, the humans that are working for us?
I think that's great. I just want to thank you, Deborah. The reason I wanted you to come on is because you've been a leader in all of this, and you've been working through all this stuff for 20 years. And so, now a lot of businesses and organizations are struggling to figure this out. I mean, I would encourage, obviously people can go to ruglobal.com, but beyond that, just Google Deborah Rue and DeBraruh. Google Deborah Rue and just look at all the things that come up, and that will give you a little bit of an idea of all the things that you've accomplished. You haven't had an in-person office since when? When's the last time that you had a?
It's 2009, I believe.
Yeah, so you haven't had 11 years. You have not had an in-person office, and yet somehow, Deborah, you managed to get a couple of things done.
Yeah. I've been quite productive.
And you've walked the talk. and you have, your team and the people that you work with. I think I might be the most white, straight, able-bodied person on the team, but yeah, I mean, you really walk that talk, and I just want to thank you again for sharing. I knew that your perspective would be really valuable to people that are just kind of starting this journey.
Yeah, it's a journey worth taking. It's a journey worth taking because we can do better than we've been doing. We can be
Yeah.
better to our planet. We can be better to each other. And once again, it's a time of great mental illness and stress and anxiety. We don't know when it's going to end. Their estimates, we're not going to really get our equilibrium back for a long time. So we have to be kind and empathetic to each other during these times. But please don't use this time to think that people with disabilities and other disenfranchised parts of our society can't add value, because you will be absolutely wrong with that.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you so much. Well said.
Thank you, Doug.